rails and a go woke or go broke. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer. Welcome, everyone, to Mark and the Millennials. This podcast is called Off the Rails. Yes, the Democrat Party and all of their polling shows us, and the media is off the rails as well. And we have an incredible go woke or go broke. It's pretty funny. And, of course, a daily Biden dumpster fire, which is pretty interesting, because if it had happened to a Republican, it would be indeed a dumpster fire. So first up, growing tensions between Kamala Harris, the vice president of the United States, and Joe Biden. In the New York Post, Kamala Harris sidelined amid growing tension with Biden, insiders say. Vice President Kamala Harris feels increasingly isolated inside the White House as her approval ratings plummet, with the first female VP believing she's not getting the same support given to other members of the Biden administration, according to a detailed new report. Despite their public show of unity, Biden and his right-hand woman have a dysfunctional relationship that has reached an exhaustive stalemate, according to CNN, which based its report on interviews with nearly 36 insiders. So not just one person, 36 people. At a time when the president would usually be expected to promote his vice president as a future replacement, Biden has instead been sidelining Harris as a potential liability. For their part, Harris's allies are reportedly frustrated with the president for dumping politically fraught issues in her lap, including, infamously, the ongoing illegal immigration crisis at the U.S.-Mexico border. They're consistently sending her out there on losing issues and the wrong situations for her skill set, summed up one former top Harris aide to CNN. How do you like that? Quote, they're consistently sending her out there on losing issues on the wrong situations for her skill set. So there you have insiders in the administration saying that's a losing issue, the idea of having open borders. And she's not doing anything about it. I mean, she didn't do anything about it when she was in California, when she was a United States senator, and California was being inundated by illegal aliens. And now California, of course, is a complete mess itself, in large part because of too much immigration, right? Once again, podcast listeners, limited immigration is not a bad idea when it's legal and you get to pick and choose and you get to properly vet people. But illegal, unlimited, unbridled immigration is a mess, and it literally will destroy a country, like it kind of sort of is doing in the state of California. And so the idea that you would bring someone who was a former United States senator from California and make her vice president and say, well, she's going to do anything differently than she did when she was in California is kind of funny. So obviously, she's blaming the fact that Harris is blaming Biden, that he's putting her on losing issues. Other aides say the vice president should have asked for better defined responsibilities at the start of the administration, but that was not done, so out of fear of appearing disloyal to the president. In March, Biden announced that Harris would lead the administration's talks with Mexico and Central America about slowing the tide of immigrants across the U.S. border. However, with the exception of a rocky visit to Mexico and Guatemala in early June and a brief trip to El Paso at the end of that month, Harris has largely avoided the issue in public. Last month, while Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Attorney General Merrick Garland, and Homeland Security Chief Alejandro Mayorkas met with their Mexican counterparts about the issue, Harris was in New Jersey to promote Biden's multi-trillion-dollar social spending bill. Insiders told CNN the West Wing has been especially bothered by Harris's handling of the border issue. The VP's trip to Mexico and Guatemala was overshadowed by a disastrous interview with NBC News anchor Lester Holt, in which Harris responded to Holt by noting that she hadn't yet been to the frontier region by chuckling and joking, and I haven't been to Europe. Ha ha ha. Immigration advocates have also expressed disappointment with Harris. Fernando Garcia, executive director of Border Network for Human Rights, told CNN that he was optimistic Harris would take action, but instead just disappeared. Quote, we haven't heard any substantive messaging push for better immigration policies, he told CNN. We haven't seen her leadership. CNN reported that those close to Harris are miffed at the White House for, in their view, failing to mount a stronger defense of the vice president over the whole interview. That frustration has grown after the administration sprang to publicly defend the paternity leave taken amid the global supply chain crisis by Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a potential challenger to Harris for the Democrat presidential nomination either in 2024 or 2028. Podcast listeners, are you laughing out loud yet? Can you imagine Harris and Buttigieg in a primary running for a Democrat primary running for president of the United States? And Buttigieg is like, yes, first I ran Indianapolis into the ground more. Then I became Secretary of Transportation and didn't show up because my husband was giving birth to twins. and while that was happening, I took parental leave while there was a global supply chain crisis of the magnitude we've never seen before in the United States history. But you know what? Make me president. It's hard to miss the specific energy that the White House brings to defend a white man, knowing that Kamala Harris has spent almost a year taking a lot of the hits that the West Wing didn't want to take themselves, a former Harris aide told the outlet. CNN also reported that Harris did not attend most of the meetings Biden held with members of Congress as he attempted to secure passage of the $1.2 trillion bipartisan infrastructure bill. Well, she probably wasn't at those meetings because when she negotiates or is asked a difficult question, since she really doesn't know the answer to anything, she just laughs. She's like, At one point, on November 5th, with the White House attempting to lock down crucial votes, Harris visited a NASA facility in suburban Maryland. Eleni Kounalakis, the lieutenant governor of California and a longtime friend of Harris, confirmed there is irritation. Quote, it is natural that those of us who know her, how much more helpful she could be than she is currently being asked to be, they told CNN. That's where the frustration is coming from. The CNN report is not the first time Harris has been the focus of DC whispers. At the end of June, Politico reported that her office was chaotic with a tense and at times dour atmosphere. That's because she's not up for the Veep job, ladies and gentlemen. And if she's not up for the Veep job, and you've seen her in the interviews, right? You don't even need someone to tell you this. If you just see her in the current interviews, whenever there is a difficult issue, which there is always going to be difficult issues that you must solve while you're at that high level of government, and you laugh because you're trying to buy time for the answer you're trying to give because you really don't know how to solve the issues because you've never been challenged before in your life. You've never been challenged, by the way. What I mean by that is you've never been challenged by a person running against you who could actually take you out in an election. So she always had, all she had to do was win the primary in California, and that involved being as far left as possible. And then there was some token Republican put up because it's California and she would easily win. So she never was challenged by the media, and she was never really challenged by the Republican Party because the Republican Party is so weak, admittedly, in California. But now she's at the national level. And at the national level, there is a lot at stake. And so people are like looking at her going, why would we put her anywhere that involved actually making a decision? Let's just put her on the sidelines. And that's what the Biden administration is doing. So, quote, people are thrown under the bus from the very top. There are short fuses and it's an abusive environment, one source told the outlet at the time. It's not a healthy environment and people often feel mistreated. It's not a place where people feel supported, but a place where people feel like the S word. That report suggested that efforts by Harris's chief of staff, Tina Flournoy, to shield the Veep from criticism had instead led to Flournoy dismissing or ignoring staff ideas, refusing to delegate responsibility, unnecessarily prolonging decisions, and shifting the blame for negative outcomes. On Sunday, Flournoy denied being one of those taking sides against her boss. If someone is accusing me of being loyal to Joe Biden, I'll take that. If someone is accusing me of being disloyal to Kamala Harris, I won't take that, Flournoy told CNN. She doesn't believe there is a conflict between being loyal to her and being loyal to Joe Biden. Her spokesman, Simone Sanders, also dismissed insiders griping. It is unfortunate, she said, after a productive trip to France, in which Kamala spoke, Kamala vous français. Yeah, we talked about that last podcast, in which we reaffirmed our relationship with America's oldest ally and demonstrated U.S. leadership on the world stage. And following passage of a historic bipartisan infrastructure bill that will create jobs and strengthen our communities. There go the talking points. Some in the media are focused on gossip, not on the results that the president and the vice president have delivered, Sanders said. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki joined the defense of Harris Sunday night, tweeting, quote, "For anyone who needs to hear it, at Veep is not only a vital partner to at POTUS, but a bold leader who has taken on key important challenges facing the country, from voting rights to addressing root causes of migration to expanding broadband." Yeah, to addressing root causes of migration. Yeah, you know what she did? She went to Guatemala, and then she went to Mexico, the Veep did, and she said, well, the root cause of migration, which of course is the new word in the press, by the way, it's really illegal immigration. The root causes of illegal immigration that the Veep came up with is, you got it, climate change. That's what they said. That's what she said. And of course, meanwhile, the American people are like, look, that we need to address the root causes of illegal immigration. And we have been. And the problem is every time we send money south of the border, the kleptocrats steal it. You know, that's what they do. It ends up in Switzerland somewhere rather than having it reach the people. And so we know that because historically, unfortunately, it's true. All right, politically incorrect, but true, that historically, Hispanic countries are run very badly and are notoriously corrupt at every level. That is a fact. Okay? Look at Mexico. Look at Central America. Look at South America. I mean, understandably, Brazil is Portuguese, right? I understand that. But the rest of South America, Cuba, Puerto Rico. Okay, it's not politically correct to say these things, but come on, guys. I mean, they're batting south of the border at 100% of being able to run economies as badly as one can possibly run them. It's no wonder that they want to come here. We understand that. But it needs to be legal, okay? So the article continues. The revelations emerged days after USA Today's Suffolk University poll showed Biden with an approval rating of 37.8%, a new low for the president. However, Harris's approval rating was 10 points lower than the president's at 27.8%, exactly 10% lower. Now, look, this needs to be put into perspective, podcast listeners. If you are an elected official, it doesn't matter where you're elected, okay, or at what level. If your approval rating with your voters is 27.8%, you have no chance. You have no chance. You are going to get wiped out, and everybody around you is going to get wiped out. And moreover, that would be considered just an absolute tidal wave to just sweep you out. And it's very, very difficult to recover from that. And the problem is that Harris is blaming Biden for giving her really crummy assignments as the vice president. Well, that's the job of the vice president. Sorry, Kamala. And if she had any kind of substance, she'd be able to fill that job and make it at least appear, whether true or not, that she knows what she's doing. She can't even do that. I mean, that's how bad of an actress that she is. And of course, all reports that we knew about Kamala before she was even nominated for vice president, we all knew that she was an awful, awful United States senator, and that she made her way to the top by all kinds of kind of strange interactions, including with Willie Brown, who kind of was the guy that helped her move up the chain. And I guess that's as far as we'll go with that with Kamala. The point is, this is an administration that is off the rails when your vice president has 27.8% approval rating, and the chances of her taking over as president of the United States because the top guy is in early stages or mid-stage of dementia are really, really high that she's going to be taking over that job. So imagine going from 37.8% to from a vice president becoming the president and then having 27.8%. I mean, do you think for 1 minute that somehow they're going to recover from this in 1 year? It's possible. I just don't see it happening because their policies don't work, and they've never worked. And we see it in the economy. And so, next up, podcast listeners, Chicago police cancel their day off. So the Chicago police were going to have a day off, and Chicago police decided to cancel that day off, reportedly bracing for the Rittenhouse verdict. So this has been reported in Fox News and elsewhere. Fraternal Order of Police President John Catanzara claimed decision was made if verdict doesn't go positive. The Chicago Police Department has canceled one regular day off this week for all full-duty officers, so in other words, everybody, to enhance public safety. A decision reportedly made to brace for possible upheaval ahead of a potential verdict in the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse in Wisconsin. Quote, to enhance public safety and to address current crime patterns, all full-duty sworn members will have one regular day off canceled this upcoming weekend between November 12th, 2021 through November 14th, 2021, the Chicago Police Department told Fox News in an emailed statement. And by the way, they're still standing by because we are awaiting, of course, at this particular point in time, the Kyle Rittenhouse jury to deliberate. The statement to Fox News did not provide specific reasons for the canceled days off, while the department didn't provide an answer when asked if a potential verdict in the Rittenhouse trial factored into its decision. Local reports said that the Fraternal Order of Police President John Catanzara claimed otherwise. So Catanzara posted a video to YouTube accusing the city of violating an agreement in which it must provide advance notice before the regularly scheduled days off were canceled. So this is kind of the status of things in the city of Chicago, right? You have the police who have no patience for Mayor Lori Lightfoot, and they have no patience for Mayor Lori Lightfoot, aka Beetlejuice, because of the fact that the mayor doesn't like the police, and she doesn't like policing, and she doesn't support or believe in public safety. But the reason why I decided to bring up this particular issue in Chicago with respect to the police and the Rittenhouse trial is because I have to ask the podcast listeners, at what point in America did we get to a time when many citizens of the country, not all, many citizens of the country decided that mob rule of trials is the way things are supposed to go? In other words, I didn't get my way. My guy didn't get, he wasn't freed, or my guy wasn't thrown in jail forever. And therefore, the mob is going to rule, and the mob is going to be able to take that guy out and shoot him or hang him. I mean, at what point, podcast listeners, did this happen in the United States of America? And what's the irony of this report in Chicago, that the Chicago police are concerned about mass rioting if Rittenhouse is, if he's found innocent, which of course he is innocent. The great irony of this is the whole trial is about unlawfulness in the streets and rioting and pillaging and burning and killing and hurting people and stealing. That's what the whole trial is about. And then you got the one good guy with a gun who's protecting himself from a bunch of bad guys with all kinds of weapons, whether it be their feet, their hands, boards in their hands, guns, knives, who knows what. And it's so ironic that the very same people and the very same types of people, by the way, by types, I mean all different colors, white, black, you name it, who perpetrated these riots in the streets and all throughout 2020 are, I'm sure, the very same people in Chicago who are like, you know what, since we just don't want another Rittenhouse to happen. So he needs to be put in jail and the key needs to be thrown away. That's what Hakeem Jeffries said, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries. And so therefore, if he's put in jail and we throw away the key, that gives us the freedom to go out and do what? More rioting. And that's really what this is about. And that's, to me, one of the key takeaways of this trial, no matter what the outcome is that the mob has decided that every time they don't get their way, they're going to engage in the same activities they did in 2020. And of course, we warned the Democrats, when you feed the snake, eventually the snake is going to bite you and it's going to eat you alive. And that's exactly what's happening here. And the snake are these evil individuals who think that rioting and mob rule is the way forward in America. I mean, talk about taking us back to the dark ages. And further proof of this is the Rittenhouse trial judge has been receiving threatening messages. So Judge Bruce Schroeder, who has been presiding over the Kyle Rittenhouse murder trial in Wisconsin, has been receiving threatening emails, faxes, and other messages, according to reports. The threats have included some aimed at the judge's family members, the Daily Mail reported. The messages also include accusations of racism against the judge and demands that he withdraw from the case, according to the Washington Examiner. Quote, "Enjoy your term, Judge. It's about to be your last," end quote, one message read, the Examiner reported. Quote, "If I ever meet you in person, I fully intend to spit directly in your face, regardless of the cost. You're disgusting," end quote. And here's another one. Quote, "Your Honor, I didn't know that under your black robes of justice, you wear a white robe of the Klan," another message has said, according to the outlet. Quote, "There is no way a fair trial can be heard under your supervision. Better yet, resign." There you go. The cancel culture, right? They're right out there. "I'm not getting my way. I'm going to cancel you." Another one, quote, "Make sure and tell Schroeder that a worthless piece of S he is," said a third message, which claimed to be from Jesus Christ, according to the Examiner. Quote, "He'll find out officially when his heart seizes up in a few years and he has to stand trial before a real judge." And so, folks, this is what is happening in America. And I can only hope that the FBI, who's really worried about all of the wrong people like parents at Board of Education meetings, I can only hope that the FBI reads all those emails and filters out the ones where they're actually true threats against the judge's family and against the judge himself, threats against his person, or against his family, and that those emails are tracked down and that those individuals are charged. Because this is the only way that we back off the mob, was when the mob realizes that there are consequences, that there are actually consequences to their awful actions and to their awful words. There have to be consequences. And there were consequences when Kyle Rittenhouse were out there on the street, when people tried to attack him. And there should continue to be those consequences. At least in Florida, the Florida legislature passed a law that strengthened the stand your ground law. That's like, hey, if you have a store in Florida and there is a mob that is rioting through the streets, kind of like they did throughout 2020, but not so much in Florida. If that happens in Florida, the legislature in Florida said, and the governor of Florida signed the bill, and you're in your store and people start throwing rocks at the windows and breaking in your store and they're breaking through the door, you can shoot them. And as I've said before, there's no better way, sadly, to stop this madness, okay, than for the good people with the gun to properly use the gun, properly use it, and properly protect themselves and properly protect their stores. And this is the right way to do things. And Florida got that right. There's no doubt about it. So next up, podcast listeners, MSNBC says truck drivers are too Trumpian. So this is in the Daily Caller. MSNBC's Tiffany Cross shames the trucking industry for employing too many aggressive Trump voters. So MSNBC host Tiffany Cross took aim at the trucking industry Sunday for employing too many middle-aged white males who overwhelmingly voted for Trump and are too aggressive on the road. And so, podcast listeners, the best way to understand why MSNBC is attacking truck drivers is because right now in America, there is a delta of truck drivers for a whole variety of reasons. And if you know anything about, the shipping containers, which I'm sure you've seen plenty of those, and they come into port off of these ships and they're loaded off of the ships. There are two ways for the shipping containers to get to the market. One is on trains, and the other is on trucks, large trucks, tractor trailers. And those truck drivers are highly trained, and they're very, very good drivers for the most part. I know there are always exceptions, okay? But the thing is, these are good people. These are great people, these truck drivers, and they are the heart and soul of America. And they're now working overtime, and they're having to deal with all of these other issues that are being put into place in many of these ports where it's like, no, you can't come on the property unless you're part of a union. It's like, dude, I'm an independent truck driver, okay? I've got my own truck, and I just want to take shipping containers to their destination. And they go, oh, no, you got to join the union. So this is just some of the stuff that these guys have to put up with. And I will say for the record, podcast listeners, that as a blue-collar Republican, I have a grandfather. He's deceased. He was a truck driver. And then three of my uncles, truck drivers. So imagine that. That's all on the same side. So long history of professional tractor trailer truck drivers in my family. And I was always very proud of them because all of them were so happy to work in that industry that not a one of them had an accident that in any way, shape, or form affected their career, in that they had no accident whatsoever. I think a car may have hit one of them, but they were in a parking lot or something like that. My point is, these are great people. So MSNBC's Tiffany Cross shames the trucking industry for employing too many Trump voters. So now the reason why there's a supply chain crisis, according to MSNBC, is because Trump truck drivers, right? It's the Trump truck drivers who aren't taking the products to the market. They're the bad people. That's why we're calling this podcast Off the Rails, because it's not just the administration that's off the rails. It's even the mainstream media, because they're just trying to grab at anything to explain it. It's still Trump's fault. It's those truck drivers. They don't want to do their jobs. So we have 3 clips on this podcast, listeners, of MSNBC talking and interviewing a woman who wants to bring more women as truck drivers. I think that's a great idea, by the way. Why not? Why not? But at this particular time in American history, do you really care who drives the FedEx truck up to your house, or the UPS truck up to your house to deliver the stuff that you ordered online? Does it matter to you what color their skin is? Because it doesn't matter to me. Nor should it matter who drives the tractor trailer with the shipping container on the back of it. It shouldn't matter to you who they are or what they look like. What should matter to you is, are they competent? Are they good at their job? Are they careful? Are they courteous to other drivers? That's what should matter. But if you're MSNBC and you're the mainstream media, you've got to go after Trump, and you've got to go after everybody but the Biden administration and Pete Buttigieg, who once again is home with his husband, and they're twins because his husband just gave birth. And so here's MSNBC says truck drivers are too Trumpian First up, first clip, here it is.
I have to tell you, my brother is a truck driver, and he drives across the country, and it's very nerve-wracking to me when he's on the road because it feels like a dangerous industry. But you're trying to disrupt that and bring more people who look like us to the industry. Tell us why.
Yes, ma'am. First of all, thank you for having me this morning. And yes, we are. And we say we're not building truck drivers, but safe CMB operators, folks that can get back to their home whenever they're done with their shift. That's the most important part.
Okay, so reasonable, right? The most important thing is that you have people that get home safely and drive safely. Seems pretty reasonable. Oh, that's not good enough for MSNBC, because at MSNBC, you know, Tiffany Small has to, and Tiffany Small being the reporter and interviewer, she has to bring race into it. Because, come on, that's all they've got now. What else would explain the crisis in the supply chain? It's racism. We have that clip, and here it is.
Well, how can the industry be more welcoming? Because I have to tell you, I talked to a lot of truck drivers and preparing for this segment, and most of these truck drivers are people of color, and they talked about, hearing some of the racism over the CB. This is, again, an industry populated by a lot of white men over the age of 55. This group of people overwhelmingly voted for Trump. Some people have talked about, aggressive truck drivers cutting them off or not being helpful. So obviously, the more populated it is with people of color, I think you'll see less of that. But how can you encourage people to come and disrupt this space when it seems a bit unwelcoming?
I'm almost at a loss for words, because there's MSNBC saying that only white men over 55 are truck drivers and they're really bad drivers. And I mean, it's almost like MSNBC can get away with saying anything like, well, only people who are of Indian or Pakistani descent can own a 7-Eleven. Podcast listeners, this isn't what I'm saying, but this is what MSNBC apparently is able to say as a media outlet, right? And the thing is if you have truck drivers out there that are male and they like being truck drivers, as I've said earlier, do you really care who's driving? I mean, I have no doubt in my mind, with the need for more truck drivers in the United States, that the industry would be all too happy to hire more truck drivers, and they would care less about the color of their skin. What they're going to probably look at, though, is, hey, do you have a criminal record? Number one, because, we don't want you to steal the stuff in the truck when you take it. And number two, they probably want to find out, well, do you have any kind of drug convictions or drug issues? Because obviously, if you're driving, we don't want you to be impaired by alcohol or drugs. All those, those things seem pretty reasonable to me. But I'm quite certain that they could care less about the color of your skin when they need so many truck drivers. And as I said, by truck drivers, we mean across the board, picking up all of those containers and all the ports across America and taking them to their destination. And then in addition to that, the FedEx driver that comes to the front door of your house, the Amazon driver that comes to the front door of your house to deliver packages, the UPS driver that comes to the front door of your house and delivers packages. I mean, my God, there are so many needed drivers across the country, but MSNBC has to explain it away by saying it's those Trump white 55 and over drivers, and they're dangerous drivers too. That's the problem. Fortunately, the woman who was being interviewed on MSNBC had a somewhat reasonable response and didn't kind of take the bait too much. So we have her response to end this clip in this series, and we have it. Here it is.
Well, I think just what you're doing, getting myself as a Black female out there and letting people know. I drove for almost 8 years and yes, ran into lots of racism, but however, was out there to do my job. And I think that women are definitely, the more we can just get the news out to them, that trucking is an industry that will not only help them to get further in life, but their family and all of that, and present the package to them appropriately, regardless of what anybody else has to say. They're going to be in charge. They're going to be the person behind that steering wheel doing the job every single day and making it happen. So we just need to get the word out there. And I appreciate you for helping us get this word out. The women will be able to close this deficit if we can just let them know.
Yes. So, once again, it's separating people into tribes on MSNBC. And, it's one tribe against another, pitting them against one another instead of saying, hey, Madam, since you're a truck driver, what is your solution or, to try to solve the supply chain crisis, at least as it relates to the delta of truck drivers we have in the United States? That would be a good question to ask, because then it would be, okay, how do we solve this problem rather than how do we pit tribes against each other and say, it's the white guys who are truck drivers or there aren't enough women, what have you. To be fair, podcast listeners, I've never met a woman who said, you know what I really want to be? As a truck driver. That's what I want to be. I'm not knocking it if you're a woman and you want to be a truck driver, okay? Maybe some communities would be more open to that idea than others, but I'm not going to knock it if you want to be a woman and be it. But I'm just saying, I haven't really met any women in all of my years who have said that that's, something that they want to do. And I'm pretty sure that if women went and applied for these jobs and got the proper training, because you need to be properly licensed in the special classes of licensing to drive these trucks, then I'm certain they would be hired. But this is what makes MSNBC in such trouble, falling off the rails, just like the Biden administration, because of the fact that there's nothing left for them to go after. They can't really talk about policy anymore. They still have to keep alive all this nonsense. And speaking of MSNBC, NBC owns MSNBC, right? So I think it's Comcast, NBC, and MSNBC Universal Studios. That's one big, mega corporation. So you just heard MSNBC. And next up, podcast listeners, we have NBC, which of course has Saturday Night Live on it. And Saturday Night Live is alive and well. It's hard to believe, except that no one's watching it hardly. They face calls to be canceled because it's awful after mocking Rogan and Cruz, embarrassing and sad. So Saturday Night Live, according to the Daily Wire, is facing calls to be taken off the air by critics who charge that the show has fallen so much from where it was once that pulling it off the air might be the most compassionate move. The calls for the show to be taken off the air and the mockery that it received over the weekend came in response to the show's cold open, which mocked Senator Ted Cruz and famed podcast host Joe Rogan. And so we actually have a small clip from this, podcast listeners, because the interesting thing about this show, SNL, is, and if you haven't watched it recently, it's worth watching just so you can get a feel and a sense of what SNL is really doing these days. You know what that is? There is one lane for comedy at SNL. There's only one lane. You have to stay in the lane of making fun of anyone who is Republican and making fun of anyone who has an idea that is outside of the woke class or the progressive class. So as long as you stay in that lane, that's considered comedy at NBC and at MSNBC and, of course, at SNL, their so-called comedy flagship show. And so here's what happened. You have the leads in SNL's opening, and you got one person dressed up as Ted Cruz, another person that's supposed to be Joe Rogan, and they have Big Bird there, and they're allegedly on Sesame Street. And what do you think they're making fun of? They're making fun of anyone that is evidence-based in coronavirus debates. We have a clip on this from SNL. You can see how they're just falling off the rails. Here's the clip.
Well, that's right. I used to host Fear Factor, and now doctors fear me.
Can you help me, Joe?
Oh, sure thing, Big Bird. You see, I took Carlos Mencia down. I could take COVID. Here's some zinc, and ayahuasca, and some horse medicine.
Well, why would a bird take horse medicine?
I'm a human, and I took horse medicine. And I'm speaking of things that are horse-like. Today's two sponsors are the letters S and D, as in I can S my own D.
And that's supposed to be funny. Okay. So that was supposed to be Joe Rogan. And you got Big Bird, and they're making fun of the fact that Joe Rogan has ivermectin and has taken ivermectin. And that, of course, the media has made fun of him, saying, well, it's horse medicine. And we've talked about this before in the podcast, but folks, it misses the point. SNL and NBC and MSNBC, they all have this one lane of comedy. And if you just heard that and you're just waiting for yesteryear when SNL just made fun of anybody, I mean, anything was fair game. And it was genuinely funny, including when they made fun of things that you thought, you supported. But it was all funny because it was, everything was open up. Everyone was fair game. I guess that's the term. And not anymore. Not anymore. It's the same stuff every single week. And you just say to yourself, who would ever want to go there? I mean, it's like the progressives, it's like they're at a CCP rally, the Chinese Communist Party rally. And it's like, oh, the Americans are terrible. And everybody's like, yay. And China is wonderful. Yay. It's like, how boring would that be? But that's what we are becoming as a country. At least the mainstream media is becoming. And SNL, I mean, no, they shouldn't be canceled. The best thing to do is just don't watch them, right? In which case, unfortunately, they will cancel themselves, because that's always what happens with woke comedy. So next up, podcast listeners, Beto O'Rourke says he is running for Texas governor. Well, I thought Beto O'Rourke ran for president of the United States. First he ran for United States Senate, and he was shellacked by Ted Cruz. Then he ran for president of the United States and just was like one of the first people to drop out. I think he was the first person to drop out. Now he's running for Texas governor. So Beto O'Rourke in the Wall Street Journal, the former Democrat U.S. presidential candidate, said he's running for governor of Texas. Quote, together, we can push past the small and divisive politics that we see in Texas today and get back to the big, bold vision that used to define Texas, a Texas big enough for all of us, Mr. O'Rourke said on Twitter, which of course says nothing. Mr. O'Rourke previously served 3 terms in the House of Representatives. He narrowly lost his 2018 run for the U.S. Senate against incumbent Republican Senator Ted Cruz, a challenge that helped make Mr. O'Rourke a political celebrity, but his bid for the Democrat 2020 presidential nomination failed to catch fire. Mr. O'Rourke's announcement video Monday focused in part on the electrical grid crisis in the winter that left millions of residents without power amid historically cold winter weather and forced families to take desperate measures to stay warm. Quote, they were abandoned by those who were elected to serve and look out for them, Mr. O'Rourke said in this video. It's a symptom of a much larger problem we have in Texas right now. Those in positions of public trust have stopped listening to, serving, and paying attention to and trusting the people of Texas. Mr. O'Rourke, a native of El Paso, will be taking on Republican Governor Greg Abbott, who was first elected to the office in 2014. Mr. Abbott's campaign issued a statement shortly after the announcement accusing Mr. O'Rourke of having more in common with President Biden than he does with Texans, and showing Mr. O'Rourke's face melting into Mr. Biden's. The contrast for the direction of Texas couldn't be clearer, the campaign said. Recent polling has shown the 2 men are close, with Mr. Abbott having a slight edge. A poll conducted in late October by Rice University and the Texas Hispanic Policy Foundation found 44% of 2020 voters prefer Mr. Abbott versus 43% for Mr. O'Rourke. A poll that same month by University of Texas and the Texas Tribune found a wider spread among registered voters, with 46% for Mr. Abbott and 37% for Mr. O'Rourke. I'm quite certain, podcast listeners, that the current governor, Governor Abbott, is way ahead of O'Rourke. Because remember, O'Rourke was the guy that wants to ban guns in a place like Texas. I mean, there's no chance, podcast listeners, of this guy ever getting elected, if not for any other reason than that one reason, namely the reason that O'Rourke wants to ban guns. I mean, it's insanity, just absolute insanity. Yet, we know for a fact that the media would love nothing better than to flip the state of Texas. So podcast listeners, as you know, the Democrat Party has completely and utterly given up on Florida. So they haven't quite given up on Texas yet, because since Texas is a border state and they're hoping to flood Texas with as many new Democrat voters as possible by paying them $450,000 each, then maybe they can flip the state of Texas that way. I got to tell you something. I still don't think they're going to do it, the Democrats, because of O'Rourke's stance on guns. I mean, if you live in Texas and you got an open border because of the Biden administration, you have many people coming into Texas who are they're all breaking the law, but some of them are gang members. Some of them are looking for a better life. Some of them are human traffickers. Some of them are drug dealers. And Beto's saying, oh, you know what? I want open borders like Biden, and I'm going to take away your gun to be able to protect yourself from these individuals coming across the border illegally. Makes no sense whatsoever. Beto O'Rourke has no chance of making it, none whatsoever. So next up, podcast listeners, we have the Daily Biden Dumpster Fire. And the Daily Biden Dumpster Fire has the President of the United States speaking at an event. And at that event, the president uses a word that actually has been made illegal. A lot of people don't know this. The word was made illegal for its use in the federal government by President Obama. That's a fact. You're not allowed to use the word. And nonetheless, didn't stop Biden from using the word. And we're going to talk about this a little bit because I'm not necessarily sure. Well, first, you decide. We have the clip, and here it is.
I've adopted the attitude of the great Negro at the time pitcher in the Negro Leagues, went on to become a great pitcher in the pros, into the Major League Baseball after Jackie Robinson. His name was Satchel Paige.
So that's Joe Biden. And in Reuters, of course, here's the media with his back. Fact check. Biden goes viral with muddled reference to 1920s Negro Leagues player Satchel Paige. Users on social media are sharing a clip of the United States President Joe Biden talking about American baseball player Satchel Paige and criticizing his use of language. Examples can be seen here and here. The clip comes from a longer video of remarks Biden made at Arlington National Cemetery on Veterans Day, November 11th, 2021. And at the 109:50 mark, Biden says, quote, I've adopted the attitude of the great Negro at the time. Pitcher in the Negro League went on to become a great pitcher and the pros and eventually baseball after Jackie Robinson. His name was Satchel Paige, and Satchel Paige on his 47th birthday pitched a win against Chicago. The clip shows Biden appearing to stumble over his words, with the first mention of Paige before going on to reference the Negro Leagues in the following phrase. Roughly 3,400 players competed in the 7 Negro Leagues from 1920 through 1948, but were denied equal recognition to their white counterparts long after Jackie Robinson became the first black player in a major league roster in the modern era in 1945. So that's Reuters basically trying to provide backup for Biden for the use of the word that apparently you can't say anymore as a federal employee or a federal official in the United States. So I have a different view of this. And you know what that view is? You should never ban words. As you know, podcast listeners, in Mark and the Millennials, we have the dumbest bill in America. And so many times the bills are about banning. And that's not the function, okay? Primarily of government. How do you ban language? Okay, because if something happened in the past, including language that is offensive, such as the word Negro, obviously offensive, and there was this thing called the Negro League, which is a fact. It's a league of baseball players and baseball teams that played against one another because black players were prohibited from playing in the white professional baseball teams and leagues. And how do you talk about those historical events if you can't actually use the words. And I think really Joe Biden, whether he really knows it or not, has stumbled upon something that's really important that needs to be talked about. And that is when you're going to use the term Satchel Paige, and he belonged to the Negro League at that time. That's what it was called. And here's what the Negro League was. And here is why it is important in American history. Go down that road. Podcast listeners, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that, of course, Biden is in this daily dumpster fire because he can't really complete a comprehensive sentence or paragraph to really explain what he's trying to talk about. And he had an opportunity there to say, you know what? President Obama tried to outlaw this word, but if we actually talk about the word and the term, then we can actually talk about what happened in history. And also, you know what we can do? We can look at today's American League and National League in baseball and realize how far we've come. How far we've come. But there's another part of this too, podcast listeners, and that is Joe Biden has to constantly bring up these issues of we're talking about 1920s, way in the past, because this is the modern Democrat Party. The modern Democrat Party has to keep black voters on their plantation. They have to keep black voters on the Democrat plantation. They have to do so by expanding entitlements, by keeping schools awful and poor, and they have to be able to continue to keep black voters on the Democrat plantation, because as soon as they lose more of those voters, they will never, ever be able to get back in office again. And obviously, they're trying to replenish those voters with Hispanic voters and to pay off those Hispanic voters, as we've talked about before. But what's interesting is the media, when they're correcting and backing up Joe Biden, what they're not doing is talking about the whole history, including who was for Jim Crow. It was the Democrats. And the fact that in America today, the governor of Virginia, the current governor, he's a lame duck, but he's the current governor of Virginia, Governor Ralph Northam, wore blackface, not once, not twice, but apparently 3 times. And according to him, Ralph Northam even admitted it. And there's even a picture of Ralph Northam in his yearbook. I think it's his medical school yearbook too. So obviously he wasn't like a kid. And Governor Ralph Northam at that time in his medical yearbook was wearing either blackface or a KKK outfit. And so the media can never talk about these things. How could they? How could they possibly ever talk about the more, difficult issues? So in PolitiFact said about this, in context, Joe Biden's, quote, Negro reference to baseball player Satchel Paige. So after President Joe Biden, this is in PolitiFact, obviously they've got his back. After President Joe Biden clumsily related to an anecdote about Negro Leagues and Major League pitcher Satchel Paige, he triggered a storm of denunciation from the right. The Negro Leagues were the all-black baseball teams that played largely during the 1920s and 1930s when baseball was segregated. Paige was one of the star players. A misleading Facebook post by the conservative group For America, which has 7 million Facebook followers, stated, quote, Joe Biden, referring to Hall of Fame pitcher Satchel Paige as the great Negro at the time, sounds just as terrible as you'd think it would. Yikes. Biden's misstep drew derision from conservative commentators, as well as coverage from outlets such as Fox News, which called his remarks a gaffe. Biden, who sometimes stutters, has had his share of verbal stumbles, some of which have been misconstrued or distorted. In February, we rated Foss a claim that he had used a racial slur when he stumbled over the word eager. So, we wanted to take a closer look at the remarks For America and others were referring to and their context. Biden was in the process of describing Paige as a great Negro Leagues pitcher, but stumbled with his words and initially stopped at the word Negro. And so PolitiFact then goes on to tell you what Biden said, as well as why it was okay, even though that Biden stumbled over his words, and instead of saying a great player and an historic player in what was then called the Negro League, but Biden stopped at the word Negro and then put a period at the end. And the reason I'm saying this, podcast listeners, to you, okay, is because if this were a Republican, he would be canceled. They would say, get this guy out of office. Even if you made a gaffe, get this guy out of office. And the media would have been 100%. Reuters wouldn't have been there backing up the president if he were a Republican, saying, this is what, we're just fact checking and this is what he meant to say. And PolitiFact wouldn't have been. No, they would have all been there to do what? They would have been there to tell the president that he needs to resign from office. And remember, in this same podcast listeners, we were talking about MSNBC saying that truck drivers are too Trumpian and that white drivers 55 years of age or older who are truck drivers are really all bad drivers because of the color of their skin. And then we have the president of the United States, who's a Democrat, who says a word that was outlawed in the federal government, not even supposed to use the word, which of course is absurd because how do you talk about history if you can't use the word? But he uses the word nonetheless, stumbles over it, and he's immediately backed up. And this tells you why our country is so off the rails, because the media is off the rails. Okay. The police are being forced to go off the rails, not because they want to, but because of the blue city mayors like Lori Lightfoot. And then, of course, the Biden administration and Kamala Harris are completely at war with one another. And that administration is completely off the rails, with Joe Biden at 37.8% approval rating and Kamala Harris at 27.8% approval rating. God save our country. And that's it from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Twitter, Parler, Facebook, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.